So let's start with a few minutes of meditation to calm down our minds and get into a good state of mind, have a positive motivation for what we are doing here today. So I invite you to find a comfortable position, either sitting cross-legged on the floor or sitting in a chair. Either way is fine. Whichever way you're sitting, though, it's good if you can keep your back straight. It helps the mind to be more clear and focused. But it's also important to be relaxed. So see if you can let go of any tension there may be in your body. You can imagine it melting and then flowing out of you and sinking into the earth below and just disappearing and leaving your body as light and free of tension as possible. Become aware of your breathing, the natural, steady rhythm of the breath flowing in and out. And be aware of your breathing, but without controlling or manipulating your breathing. Just allow it to happen. And just lightly with your mind, pay attention to the breath flowing in and flowing out. And in this way, let your mind settle down in the present moment, right now, and the present place, wherever you are right now. Put aside all other thoughts of the past, the future, other places. Now let's take a few more moments to generate a positive motivation as our reason for being here and participating in this session. So for the past few weeks in the class, we have been looking at the topic of the precious human life, the precious human rebirth. So having a precious human rebirth doesn't mean everything has to be perfect in our life or in the world around us. It simply means we have really good conditions to be able to learn and practice the Dharma. So in spite of troubles we may be experiencing, personal, individual problems, and in spite of difficulties happening in the world around us, we can still have a precious human life. So really try to feel how fortunate we are to be a human being as opposed to some other kind of being with human intelligence And most importantly, that we have the chance to learn about the path to enlightenment that teaches us we have the potential to reach enlightenment. We have Buddha nature. I mean, all beings have Buddha nature, but not all beings know that they have Buddha nature and know how to develop it. So we're really fortunate that we're able to learn about our Buddha nature and to learn ways that we can start to cultivate, develop our Buddha nature through the teachings of the Buddha. So really get a sense of how wonderful this is, how fortunate you are that you have this opportunity. And generate the wish to use this opportunity in ways that are truly beneficial for yourself and for others and for the world. And then you can connect that wish with what we are doing here in this class. We are learning about the path to enlightenment, how to develop our Buddha potential, which is the best thing we can do for ourselves, but it's also the best thing we can do for others and for the world. Okay, so you probably notice I'm in a different venue than in the previous weeks. Today I have a live audience, people here at Sravasti Abbey who are attending, so kind of makes it a little easier when you have actual people in front of you rather than faces on a screen. But of course, it's wonderful to have the faces on the screen too. So we'll try this today and see how it goes. So could we have the slides up on the screen? So the topic we're going to be looking at today is death and impermanence. It's a very relevant topic for right now with what's going on in the world. But there were a couple of questions that were in the chat box from last week. So I'd like to take care of those first, and then we'll go on to this new topic. So if you go to the next slide, one question was, do the other worlds have bodies of form that are also stuck in cyclic existence and experiencing birth, aging, sickness, and death? So the explanation of this will actually come later in the Lam Rim. It's in the middle section, the middle scope of the Lam Rim, where we look at all the different realms of existence and the different problems or sufferings that are experienced in each one. But I'll just give a little explanation now, and then later we'll go into more details about that. And so some of you may have heard about 6 realms. In Buddhist teachings, they often talk about 6 realms, but there's also an explanation of 3 realms of samsara. It's not contradictory, it's just a different way of counting them. So the 3 realms are the formless realm, the form realm, and the desire realm. So the formless realm, as the name implies, is a situation where the beings do not have a body, a physical body like ours. They abide just in a mental state, a very peaceful, calm state of mind, always in meditative absorption, and their whole life passes that way. It's a very long life, very pleasant experience. So they don't have any physical suffering, like sickness, pain, and so on. But they're not completely free of suffering because they are still in samsara. So they're still subject to afflictions, afflictive emotions in the mind, and ignorance of the true nature of things, and also karma. They're not free of afflictions and karma. So they live a very long life, but eventually their karma to be there runs out. They die, and then they are born again, and they could be born in a less fortunate realm. In fact, that's, yeah, that's the highest situation there is. So anywhere else is less fortunate. And there are 4 levels in that realm, but I won't go into the details now. And then the form realm, the beings here are, these are also gods. Both the formless realm and the form realm, the beings there are called devas, or gods. In the form realm, they are also gods, and this is also a very pleasant situation. They do have bodies, but they don't have gross physical bodies like us with skin, blood, bones, and so on. They have bodies of light, and they don't even have to eat. So they're able to survive on meditation, the food of samadhi. So they also have very pleasant lives, long lives, free of physical suffering like pain and sickness. But they are also in samsara, so they're still subject to afflictions and karma. So at the end of their life, their karma runs out, they die, and then they're again reborn. That realm is a little complicated, the form realm, because there's altogether 17 levels. But again, we're not going to go into that here. It's too complicated. Then there's the desire realm. That's where we are. And in the desire realm, there are six different realms, or 6 different levels. So starting from the top in terms of, you know, having a relatively small amount of suffering and a great amount of pleasure. So at the top is the desire realm gods. So again, these are gods or devas. And there are 6 different levels of those. But they're not free of suffering. They're like heavenly existences, but they still have their problems, their suffering. Below them is the asuras, sometimes called jealous gods, because they're kind of a step down from the desire realm gods, but they can see the realms of the gods, and they can see the nice things they have, and are jealous. Yeah, and they want to try to steal away the enjoyments of the gods. So they often, you know, go to war against the gods, but they always lose because their karma isn't so good. So they have that kind of problem. Then there's the human beings. So that's where we are. So we know very well what it's like to be a human being and the kind of sufferings that we experience. But although, of course, there's a great variety of sufferings within the human realm. But everybody, even the billionaires, they have suffering. Nobody's completely free. Then below us are the 3, what are called the 3 lower realms, or the 3 unfortunate realms. Animals, we share our world with them, so we can easily see their suffering. And then hungry ghosts, we cannot see. Most people cannot see them, but some people can. Some people are able to see hungry ghosts, and they are like spirits. And as their name implies, they spend their whole lives hungry and thirsty, but unable to find sufficient food and drink to satisfy their needs. So they have really terrible suffering. Then at the very bottom, the hell beings. And there's many different kinds of hell beings. Some hells are more hot and fiery. Others are cold, freezing cold, icy, and so on. So anyway, that's just a brief overview. We'll go into more details later. But to answer the question, every being within samsara has some kind of suffering. Nobody's completely free of suffering. So even the ones who do not have physical bodies of form, they still have a more subtle kind of suffering. They still have to die, and their minds are not free of afflictive emotions and karma. Yeah. And just to mention something, I read in a book by Aya Kemma. Aya Kemma was a German nun. She's passed away now, but she was quite a well-known teacher and wrote a number of books. So in one of her books, she explained these. No, actually, she was talking about patience and the importance of being patient with other people. And she made the comment that in cyclic existence, human beings are fourth from the bottom in a system of 32 realms. Like there's a total of 32 realms within samsara, and we are fourth from the bottom. So that's quite humbling in one way, because human beings often are quite arrogant. We think we are the best, we are so intelligent, we are so great, but we're actually close to the bottom. There's a lot of beings who are much higher than we are. But her point was, this can help us to be more patient with other human beings. Like, what do you expect? We're in samsara, our minds are full of delusions, afflictive emotions. There's a lot of beings who are much more pure and spiritually evolved than we are. So it's only natural that human beings would get afflicted and, be greedy and selfish and hateful and so on. So, so I thought that was a nice point. That keeping that in mind can help us be more patient, more tolerant, more accepting of our fellow human beings, and more compassionate towards them as well. Then another question on the next slide. Somebody asked, when we were going through the 10 opportunities of the precious human rebirth, the second one was being born in a central land. And the book, the Easy Path book, page 92, explains this in terms of 4 human planets. Usually they're called continents, 4 continents. For example, if you've read or practiced the mandala offering, in the mandala offering, you have Mount Meru in the center, and then around that are these 4 continents, and so on. There's lots of other details, but they're usually called 4 continents. And so in the book, it said that the meaning of central land was, out of the 4 human continents or 4 planets, ours, planet Earth, is the best for Dharma practice, the one with the most favorable conditions for Dharma practice. And the question was, can this be taken literally? This explanation of the 4 planets, or are they elements of Buddhist cosmology that His Holiness says should be updated? So, so I'm not sure if the Buddha himself actually talked about Mount Meru. I haven't read all the sutras, but I just came across something the other day where he did mention the 4 continents. So that does seem to go back to the Buddha himself. And the Buddhist cosmology that is studied in the Tibetan monasteries mainly comes from a text called the Abhidharmakosha, or Treasury of Knowledge, by Vasubandhu, a great Indian master. There's a whole chapter in that text devoted to explaining Buddhist cosmology, all the different kinds of beings and the worlds they live in and their lifespans, and even the dimensions, how far the sun is from the earth, and so on. So it goes into great detail about that. And His Holiness, many times over the years, has been saying this, that he doesn't agree. This is an actual quotation here on the slide. He said, "After examination, I eschewed the traditional cosmology with Mount Meru in the center." And I've heard him say that if the universe really did exist that way, if there was this Mount Meru, we should be able to see it. Somebody should be able to see it. But we can't really find anybody who's been able to see it. Nobody's taken a photograph of it. Spaceships have traveled all around, the planet and all around our solar system, and they haven't found Mount Meru. So he's not following that explanation. But it seems like this point is somewhat controversial, that some teachers will say, for example, that, well, what we perceive depends upon our karma. So there's just one example of that that's given in the Buddhist texts. If there's a bowl of water, and different kinds of beings will perceive it differently. Human beings will see it as water, something to drink or something to wash our hands with. But pretas, the hungry ghosts, because of their karma not being so good, they look at that bowl and what they see is something really filthy, like blood and pus and, really yucky, dirty stuff. On the other hand, gods, the devas, because they have really good karma, they look in the bowl and what they see is blissful divine nectar, ambrosia, something incredibly beautiful and blissful. So according to our karma, we do perceive things differently. And so some teachers say, well, maybe there are beings who see Mount Meru in the 4 continents and other beings who do not because of our karma. So my own thoughts about this is I just leave it aside. I don't think it's something important to get hung up on and wonder if Mount Meru exists or not. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's not that important because, especially here in this context, the point here is to recognize that we have this human life, we have this human situation, physical and mental, and we have just wonderful opportunities to learn and practice the Dharma and develop our Buddha nature and benefit others. So let's just put our energy into that. So I hope that satisfies that question. And then a third question. Next slide. The person asked, we say in Buddhism there's no beginning to samsara, but is there an end? And there are prayers in which, for example, we ask our teachers, please remain until samsara ends, or cyclic existence. So my understanding is that there's discussion about this and different points of view. But according to the Madhyamika school, this is a Mahayana school of philosophy, it said that all sentient beings, even though there's a huge number of sentient beings, all of them have Buddha nature. All of them have the potential to attain full enlightenment. There's no sentient being anywhere in samsara who will not attain that state of enlightenment and thus be free of cyclic existence. So that's the Madhyamika view, but there are other points of view in other schools of philosophy. So it is something controversial. On the other hand, if somebody asks, well, when is that going to be? How long before samsara ends? What is the actual date when samsara is going to end? It's not possible to say that because there's so many sentient beings. They say they're uncountable, innumerable. And so, yeah, nobody, even the Buddha, can't say when samsara is going to end. And that, again, isn't something we should get hung up on and be concerned about. And And the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas themselves, they make this vow, this commitment that they will help sentient beings until the end of samsara, but they're not concerned about when that's going to be, how long that's going to take. So they're not like thinking, well, I hope it ends soon and then I can retire. Take it easy. So they don't think that way. They think however long it takes, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I will continue working to help sentient beings. Okay, so then let's move on. So we've finished the topic of the precious human rebirth, although we did it rather quickly, but that's because we have a limited amount of time to cover the whole Lam Rim. And the topic of precious human rebirth is sort of a foundation of our spiritual practice. It's like the springboard in a way. Once we understand the precious human life, the precious human rebirth, and really get a sense of that, we will feel a sense of joy about the situation that we have. Now, if you haven't felt that yet, don't worry. It often takes time, and there could be a lot of new ideas here, like about rebirth and about different realms of existence and different worlds, and sometimes Buddha's coming and sometimes not. So there's a lot of kind of new ideas to get used to here. But somebody who does spend time thinking about meditating on this topic will end up feeling joyful and enthusiastic to make good use of their life. And there's analogy that's given in the text about this feeling of joy. They say it's similar to the feeling a very impoverished person would have if they discover a precious jewel in a pile of garbage. Yeah, so there are people who do that, who spend a lot of time going through garbage cans and I don't know what they call them, huge mounds of garbage to find things that they can sell and get some money for. So such a person were to find maybe a piece of jewelry with diamonds and, worth a huge amount of money. That would be just so amazing. With that, they would be able to, relieve their poverty, their difficult situation. So it's kind of similar that we are impoverished beings in the sense that we're in samsara. We're not free of samsara. And they say in the teachings that we've had many lives before this, but most of the time we haven't been born as human beings. Most of the time we're in the lower realms. Now that's hard, but that's what they say in the teaching, that we've been in the lower realms a lot. And so just to be born as a human being is quite rare. And then on top of that, to have the chance to meet the Buddhist teachings, the teachings on the path to enlightenment is extremely rare. So it's something that almost never happens. And yet we have it. Yeah. So it is like this poor person finding a jewel. So that's the kind of feeling one ideally generates in contemplating this topic. But then on top of it, from there we have to think, okay, I have this chance to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma. So what do I do? How do I do it? So from there, one goes into the 3 scopes, which I mentioned in an earlier talk. The first scope is called a small scope. And the essence of the small scope is understanding that this life we now have is transitory. It isn't going to last forever. And when it ends, that's not total end of everything, but it's just a gateway to another life. And so we're going to be reborn after death. And where we are born depends on how we live our life. We are the ones who create our own future life. And it's mainly dependent on the karma that we create, whether we create more virtuous karma, good karma, or non-virtuous, bad karma. So it's in our hands. It's our responsibility to determine our next life. So aware of that, aware that there's the possibility of being born in an unfortunate situation, wanting to avoid that, wanting to be born in a fortunate situation, then one looks for the methods to do so. And the methods for doing that are basically, in the Buddhist context, taking refuge in the three jewels and learning about karma, and then living according to karma to the best of our ability. So there are four main topics or meditations in the small scope: death and impermanence, the sufferings of the lower realms, refuge, and karma. So we're going to go through these one by one, starting with the first one, death and impermanence. Okay, so the next slide. So this is a very important topic in Buddhism, and there's a quotation here from the Buddha about how important it is. He said, of all plowing in the autumn is supreme. Of all footprints, the elephant's is supreme. Of all perceptions, remembering death and impermanence is supreme. So this will become more clear as we go along, why it's so important. Although I did ask you to read this section of the Easy Path for today, and there is an explanation in there about the benefits of remembering death, meditating on death, and the disadvantages of not doing so. So I won't go through those today. And also just to remind you, this weekend I'm going to be teaching a course on this very topic of death and dying. How to prepare ourselves for death and also help other people who are dying. So there'll be more time to go into these topics and also meditate on them if you have the time to join this weekend course. And it's useful that this topic follows the precious human rebirth, because if we do get joyful about having a precious human rebirth, we don't want to get carried away with that joy and, you know, just be happy all the time, because we don't have all the time in the world. You know, the clock is ticking. Our life is the amount of time we have in this life is running out, and so we got to, you know, get to work and make use of it. So so it's a bit sobering, kind of brings us down to earth after the joy of the precious human rebirth. And there's lots of stories about people who, you know, without knowing Buddhism at all, have an encounter with death, either a near, you know, close encounter with death, like they almost die, or a loved one, someone very, very important to them, passes away. And that becomes really life-changing, really, you know, wakes them up to the fact that, yeah, life is fragile. We're not going to be here forever. And what's the whole purpose of life? So for many people, that is a factor that leads them to take more interest in religion and spirituality. My guess is, in fact, I heard this, for example, about Sravasti Abbey, that over the past year with COVID and the lockdown, a lot more people have connected with the Abbey and its programs. And my guess is the similar things have happened in other places as well. People have gone back to church, gone to the synagogue, connected with spiritual teachers and spiritual teachings. So this whole pandemic, just extraordinary what's been going on over the past year. Very frightening, very sad. But on the other hand, it may have had a very good effect on many people to make them realize that there's more to life than just enjoying yourself and making money and working. And, you know, let's look into spirituality. And the second point on the slide says all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, meaning they are subject to change. So this is also something stated by the Buddha. The meaning of conditioned phenomena are things that arise from causes and conditions, things that are produced from causes and conditions. So that includes most of the things in our life, in our world, our bodies. Our bodies are, produced or come into existence from causes and conditions. The egg and sperm of our parents, and then all the milk that we drank from our mother's breast, and all the food we ate once we could start eating, and so on, and the air we breathe. So many causes and conditions are necessary for our body to exist. And the buildings, house or apartment we live in, the buildings we work in, study in, and so on, also are produced by causes and conditions. All the things in nature, trees, mountains, oceans, lakes, the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear. So all of these things are conditioned phenomena. They depend on causes and conditions for their existence. So all of these phenomena are by nature impermanent. Impermanent simply means subject to change. And they do change. In fact, they're changing all the time. We can't stop things from changing. It's just their nature. And also our mind. Our mind is not a physical thing made of material particles like molecules and atoms. It's a non-physical phenomena, but it too is a conditioned phenomena, because our mind is a continuum of individual moments of experience. So every single moment or tiny fraction of a moment, there are different experiences happening in our mind. This becomes more clear when we meditate. We can see how fast our mind is changing. And so the previous experiences change, cease and change, and then give rise to later experiences. So it's the earlier experiences as well as other phenomena as well. For example, a sound happens and that becomes a cause for our mind to change and hear the sound and maybe react to the sound. So external events, phenomena, and so on, as well as the mind itself. These are the causes and conditions for our mind to change, for one moment of mind to arise, and then the next moment, and so on and so forth. So mind is also a conditioned phenomena. It's impermanent, subject to change. So Buddha said it's very, very important to understand this. Although it's not easy, it's difficult. And there's actually two kinds of impermanence, or two levels of impermanence. One is called coarse or gross impermanence. And that's impermanence that we can see, it's like visible to us. Examples of that would be death, when somebody dies. At one point in time, that person was alive and moving and talking and, full of life. And then after one moment, it only takes a moment to die, that person is gone. There's just a corpse lying there that doesn't move anymore, doesn't talk, doesn't show any signs of life. So that's something we can actually see with our eyes. And this level of impermanence also applies to things around us. For example, the destruction of a house. If a house burns down or is torn down with a bulldozer or whatever. And also in nature, as the seasons change, different things are happening. Right now we're in the middle of spring and it's just like amazing. Every day you walk out your door and there's new grass, or the grass that was there yesterday is now 2 inches higher. Leaves coming out on the trees and buds and so on. It's very exciting. So anyway, but then after a couple of months, it's all going to change again. Well, I mean, it is changing all the time, but obvious changes, the leaves are going to start to turn brown and then fall off, and flowers will die and disappear and so on. So these are just examples of the coarse level of impermanence. things that we can see with our eyes. And then there's subtle impermanence. Subtle impermanence refers to the changes that are taking place every moment or every nanosecond, whatever is the shortest amount of time. I don't know what that's called. But anyway, each tiny, tiny fraction of time, there are changes taking place. And this is why the big changes take place, why somebody dies. Because from the time they were born, their body is changing, changing, changing. It's getting older, 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 older. And eventually it comes to the end. And why the changes happen in nature, why the changes happen in something like a house, it's because actually every single moment there are changes taking place. And we know this from science, because things made of atoms, tiny particles, those teeny weeny particles we can't even see with our eyes, are not fixed and frozen and static, but they are changing constantly, not staying the same from one moment to the next. So this is something we can know intellectually, but to actually perceive it, you look at a wall and it looks like it's the same. We don't see changes taking place, even though it is the case. But they do say with meditation, it's possible to get to the point where you can actually see the changes taking place. That must be amazing. Wow. So it's recommended that we start with a coarse level of impermanence, and then later, gradually, we can get to understand the subtle ones. So it's recommended that we start with death as an example of coarse impermanence. So next slide. So the Buddha recommended that we do meditation on death, and there's different ways of doing that. The one that's usually taught in the Lam Rim is called the 9-point death meditation, and the book does explain all of those 9 points. There's 3 main points, which are called 3 roots, and then each of the 3 roots has 3 subpoints, which are called 3 reasons. And at the end of each of the 3 roots is a conclusion, a certainty that we ideally should come to by contemplating these points. So I won't go into detail with all the 9 points, but today I'll just talk about the 3 main ones, and then recommend that from now till next week you do some meditation on this, either based on the book, The Easy Path, or I've also made available a file containing the complete meditation on the 9 points from the book that I wrote, How to Meditate. So in that book, some of you may have it anyway. There's it's called the Death Awareness Meditation with all the 9 points. And if you don't have the book, you can get the file from the Thubten Norbuling website on the materials page. Okay, so the first of the 3 main points is that death is definite, or death is certain. And you might think, well, that's obvious. I know that. We might know it up here, but when it comes to our heart, our gut, the way we live our life, do we really know that death is certain? Do we really live our lives with that awareness that I'm going to die? So if we're honest with ourselves, we'll probably accept that no, we live our life as if we're going to live forever. And one of Roshi Joan Halifax, who's done a lot of work with dying people and has written a number of books about this, she has a quotation from an Indian epic called the Mahabharata. in which in one section there's this king, I can't remember his name, but he's being asked a number of questions, very kind of profound philosophical questions, and he gives answers to these. So one of the questions he's asked is, what's the most amazing thing in the world? And the king says, the most amazing thing in the world is that human beings live with people dying all around them, but they never think that's going to happen to me. So check it. Is that true? Maybe not so much nowadays with COVID, especially India, what's going on right now in India, and also many other countries where it's, high number of cases every single day. So maybe many people there are thinking, when is this going to happen to me? But normally, our normal way of thinking and way of living our life is we don't really think that we're going to die. So that needs to be overcome because it's just not true. It's just not realistic. We are going to die. It's definite that we're going to die. And so the recommended way of contemplating this is to just bring to mind individual people. You can start with the people you yourself have known in your life. Go back to the beginning of your life and think about people you have known who have died, family members, friends at school, teachers, famous people. And then say to yourself, just as that person had to die, so too I will have to die. That will happen to me one day. So that's a really helpful method to kind of bring that reality home. It's difficult. I mean, we have a lot of resistance. We don't want to think about this. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. But it's very important that we do think about it so that we prepare ourselves. That's the whole point. It's not to become morbid, not to make ourselves scared, but so we are prepared for death. So we're ready for it when it happens. Because a lot of people are not. A lot of people are caught by surprise, and then they don't know what to do. And they just freak out, they get upset, sometimes even get angry. Why is this happening to me? So from the Buddhist point of view, it's really important that at the time of death, our mind is calm, peaceful, and positive. We want to be able to die with positive thoughts and feelings, such as thinking of our teachers, thinking of the Buddha, feeling love and compassion for the people around us, aspiring for a good rebirth so we can continue our Dharma practice in the next life. So these are examples of positive thoughts, positive feelings to have at the time of death. But to be able to have those in our mind at the time of death, we have to prepare ourselves now. We have to train our minds in those thoughts now. And if we don't do that, chances are we're just going to be upset and scared, unhappy, attached, clinging to people and things, angry. And we don't want to die like that. That's not a good way to die. So that's why it's so important that we take death seriously so that we are ready for it when it happens. The next point, I'm just doing this briefly, but there's more details that you can go into when you think about it, when you meditate on it. So the next main point is the time of death is uncertain. And so this is really important too, because even if we do maybe reluctantly come to the conclusion, yes, I am going to die, our mind might think, but it's not going to happen soon. It's not going to happen anytime soon. We kind of imagine death way far away, many, many, many years away, way off on the horizon, so we don't have to think about it now. But is that realistic? Is it realistic to think that way? So to get a sense of this point, we can think about all the different ways that death happens. There are many, many different causes of death. So right now, COVID is, high on the list, but there's many other causes. Even if we don't get COVID, there's so many other things that can happen. Cancer, heart disease. I'm not sure, They do research and they come up with the number one causes of death. I'm not sure what it is right now, but I think heart disease is usually pretty high on the list. So that's a, cause of many people dying. So there's different kinds of diseases, illnesses, physical problems that can occur that cause death. But there's also a lot of things that can come from the outside, like car crashes, plane crashes, murders, terrorist attacks, animals, spiders. In some places in the world, people die from spider bites or snake bites. And in the teachings, they also say one irony is that even things that are normally meant to support life and prolong life can become causes of death. Like food. There are people who die as a result of eating food. Sometimes food is contaminated. Sometimes they overeat. They eat the wrong kind of food, or they choke on their food. I remember hearing about this guy who was eating potato chips. I mean, who would ever think potato chips could be a cause of death? But somehow a piece of potato chip went down the wrong way, got stuck. He couldn't breathe. He choked to death. So we eat food to support our life, to keep ourselves alive, but even that can become a cause of death. And also medicine. Medicine is supposed to, prolong life, save life, help us be healthy, but sometimes that becomes a cause of death. If you take the wrong medicine, or you take the wrong dose, or sometimes people go into hospital to be treated for one thing, and while they're there, they catch something else that becomes the cause of death. So the point is, there's many causes of death, many things that can happen to us. And sometimes they're unknown. I know a number of people who died in their sleep. And they weren't sick, they weren't old, they were in their 40s, healthy, and they just went to sleep and didn't wake up again. So we just never know when we go to sleep at night if we're still going to be there in the morning. It's not sure. So life is actually quite fragile, not so strong as it may sometimes seem. Then the third main point is that only Dharma helps at the time of death. Now, this may not be immediately apparent. It's something we need to contemplate. But what we are advised to think about is, like when we're normally afraid or in trouble or facing difficulties, who do we turn to or what do we turn to? Probably the first thing we turn to would be people we know, people we love, people we trust, people who we feel will help us when we need help. So our family, our friends, and so on. So that's probably what we'll feel at the time of death as we're approaching death. We'll want help from our loved ones. And they probably will, if they're there. They may not be there. We may be far away when we die, but if they are around, they probably will do whatever they can to help us. But at a certain point in the process of dying, there's an explanation of this in Tibetan Buddhism. As we die, our senses gradually stop functioning, and we go deeper into our mind, into more subtle levels of our mind. So at a certain point, we can no longer see anybody, we can no longer hear anything. So we're no longer connected with the outside world and with people. And we even get to a point where we forget, even if we could see them, we can't remember. I mean, that can happen even before we die. You can't remember who this person is and what is their relationship with you. So it's not guaranteed that we will actually get a lot of help from our friends and our family and our loved ones as we are dying. And then as we get deeper into the death process of dying, we're cut off from them. We can no longer connect with them, and we're on our own. We're really on our own from then on. So it's very limited what they can do to help us. This is a hard fact, but it's good to contemplate and realize. And then with our possessions, our money and so on, they also can't really help us because we have to leave them behind. And our body, our own body that we've had with us 24 hours a day since we were born, since we were conceived, that also can't really help us. That's going to be left behind. So contemplating these things, one comes to see that the only thing that really can help us as we're dying is Dharma. Dharma meaning spiritual practice. Because it's spiritual practice that enables us to know how to manage this whole experience of death and dying and keep our mind in a good state, keep our mind positive as we're going through that process. So I'm kind of rushing through this, but if you really contemplate these points, this is the conclusion you come to, and you realize I really need to acquaint myself with Dharma as much as I can now, while I'm still alive, to prepare myself for death. That's the only thing that's really going to help me at that time. So I better learn it and practice it, train myself now while I can. So this is the conclusion that one comes to from doing this meditation. You see the value, the importance of practicing Dharma, and the need to start practicing now, not wait, because we never know when we're going to die. And then also to work on overcoming our attachments, the things that we might get hung up on as we are dying. So that's a little bit rushed, but like I say, there is this weekend course coming up. If you have the time, you can follow it, and we will have more time to go through these points and also meditate on them and discuss them. So homework for next week, there's a homework sheet on the materials page, but just I would like you to read the next section of the text, the sufferings of the lower realms, and then do some meditation, some reflection on these points that were covered today, these 3 main points. And also just be aware of the thoughts and feelings that do arise in your mind, both during the meditations and whenever you're thinking about or reading about this topic. What kind of thoughts and feelings do you have with regard to death and dying? And don't be too worried about them if some of them are unpleasant, frightening, because all the thoughts and feelings in our mind are impermanent. They don't last. They come and they go in our mind like clouds in the sky. So notice them, be honest about them, don't deny them, but at the same time know that they are impermanent. And also the good news is we can work on our mind so that we become less afraid and uncomfortable and uneasy about death, more comfortable with it. And they talk about, in the Tibetan tradition, they talk about people who even get to the point where they look forward to death. they feel happy about dying. Now that sounds really weird, but there's a reason for that. And these are people who have really been practicing a lot, training their minds a lot, and they know how to utilize the whole process of dying as part of the spiritual path that will help them reach enlightenment more quickly. So death isn't necessarily a bad experience, a scary experience. It can actually be a beautiful experience if you know how to work with it. Okay, so we'll stop there for today. And if you do have questions, you can send them into the SPC of Thubten Norboling. So let's end with a dedication. You can just mentally dedicate the positive energy of participating in this session with a good motivation. So listening to and thinking about the Dharma is always very, very virtuous, very beneficial. So we definitely create some merit by doing this. So let's share this merit with others, with all living beings, if you're comfortable with that, or just as many as possible. May the merit, the positive energy we've created through this session bring peace, happiness, freedom from suffering, and the causes of suffering, especially afflictive emotions, especially ignorance. So may this come about for ourselves and all other beings. And may it be a cause for all of us to ultimately reach full enlightenment, Buddhahood. Okay,